All right. Thank you everyone for coming by. This is our third year here in Tracon that we are gonna have this Game Friday, uh, two tracks of game industry talks. And starting here, we'll have first hour in here, and then we split this up into this room with presentations and to Duetto 2, which is one set of stairs down, and there we will have panel discussions about how to learn to make games. So I hope that everyone has their phones silent and whatnot, and for the first presentation, I would like to introduce KP Hiltunen from Neo Games.
Does it work? Yeah, it works.
Okay, thank you. As said, I'm KP Hiltunen. I'm the director of the Neo Games, which is the Finnish hub of the games industry. We are concentrating our efforts to the digital games, basically to the mobile, PC, console games. But of course, since the games industry is way larger phenomena than just digital games, we have interest also to the other things which are connected to the games industry. And if you think about what we do, so we are basically hub of the Finnish games industry. Our mission is to accelerate the growth of the Finnish games industry with many different ways. And we have been around since 2003, so 15 years already. And during those years we have been around, the Finnish games industry has changed and developed quite a lot actually. So it was way different as an industry as it is nowadays, back in 15 years ago. We have different kind of things we do to fill our mission, starting from the different kind of trade missions to the trade fairs all around the globe, to policy making, which is kind of boring thing to do, but somebody has to do it. We are dealing quite a lot also with the publishers and investors from abroad and from Finland, and trying to find matches between the Finnish companies and investors, for instance, and publishers. And of course, we have a lot of things to do with the game developer companies, and trying to help the startup companies to find their way in the very complicated games industry of today, and doing different kind of other things with the larger companies. And well, today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of the Finnish games industry, and also a little bit about how the games industry looks like at the moment. And if you have something to ask, since you are mostly Finnish audience, I kind of anticipate that there is going to be no questions, but if someone of you feels to make a question, please do so. I have had this speech like 720 times, and I might fall asleep if I don't get any interaction from the pub audience. So let's go back to the roots. So already the ancient Romans, no, actually not. We don't go that far. But usually people tend to think that games are a new phenomena, but they are not. How many of you have been in the Suomen pelimuseo? Okay, quite many of you. That's very kind of nice to see. So if you go to the Suomen pelimuseo, the oldest known Finnish board game, which is Huviretki Aavasaksa, Lustfjärden i Aavasaksa, it was already in the 19th century, 1890 something. And that's basically was kind of starting point for the commercial game making or game development in Finland. Of course, it wasn't digital yet, because we didn't have digital devices in the end of the 19th century, but it's still kind of starting point for this game industry to emerge. And the next game you will find from the Suomen pelimuseo on Tampereen it is Tampereen Valtaus. It's a game about the civil war. So basically there was this kind of game development and ability of developing games already 100 years ago in Finland. But if you go back to where the digital game started, actually it doesn't doesn't even show on the timeline, because the first digital game developed in Finland was Chessmac, and it was made or developed to the kit computer called Telmac in 1979. It's almost 40 years ago, and it was the starting point for development of the digital games in Finland. But the story with the Chessmac is quite a short, because although it was kind of commercial game, only like 200 copies were made, and it wasn't exactly a commercial success, because I think that there was 200 Telmac computers here in Finland in the beginning of the 80s, and everybody who had the Telmac computer actually bought the Chessmac. But it was the starting point still. The actual first commercial games in the Finland were made in 1984, so it's quite a long time ago. We still don't know which was the first one. Was it Yleisurheilu, which is one of the games which was made in 1984, or was it Raharuhtinas, which was also made in 1984? But this was the year when the first commercial games were produced in Finland. And in the beginning, the games were made to the domestic market. So, as we all know, Finnish domestic market is very small, but those games were made to the domestic market, which basically meant that they were not commercial successes. We are only 5 million people, and we only have so many computers and so many people playing games. So making games to the domestic market is not a very wise option. The first game, Finnish game, which was developed and launched to the global markets, was a game called Sanction. And Sanction was developed and launched in 1986. And all these games which were made in 80s were actually made, usually they were made by individual people. So there was no team, there was no company, there was no people around. There was only one guy who was making everything himself. So the graphics, the programming, the music, everything was made by one person. And in that sense, the industry was very different in the 80s. But in the end of the 80s, these individuals making games started to group together. There was different kind of events like assembly, where people who had been making games and demos and this kind of stuff, they gathered together and started to show the games to each others. So how do you like my game? How do you like my game? It was also a way to distribute the games, because I don't know if any of you remember, but in the 80s we didn't have internet, and we didn't have this kind of cell phones or modern time facilities we have nowadays. But it was a phenomenon which basically created the beginning of the teaming up of the Finnish game industry people. And those teams in the beginning of the 90s, those teams established the first actual game developer companies. And the two oldest companies still existing in Finland, Housemarque and Remedy, were both established in 1995. And it was basically the starting point for this kind of thing we nowadays call the game industry. So before that we had individual game developers, we had game development, and even before that we had game development, but not digital one. But 95 was the starting point for commercial game development, game industry in Finland in that sense. In the end of the 90s, or when we go from 95 to the end of the 90s, the Finnish games industry was quite small. We had a bunch of companies, maybe less than 10 companies. We had around 200 people or less working in the industry. And if we think about it money-wise, the turnover of the whole industry was smaller than a turnover of medium-sized studio today. So it wasn't very big business back in those days. But something changed when we came to the end of the 90s. and it was basically the mobile. How many of you remember Nokia N-Gage phone? Good, good. So you are kind of wise people, you know things. So Nokia N-Gage, and before Nokia N-Gage, all the things Nokia did were basically something which aimed to the Finnish games industry towards mobile. If we go to the Sweden, for instance, in Sweden, most of the companies went straight to the console development or PC development, but in Finland, many of the companies focused to the mobile games. First, because of WAP, Wireless Access Protocol, and then after that, because of N-Gage. And that created something which has been very useful for us later on. It created the Finnish game developer community and Finnish games industry a pedigree of developing mobile games. In the end of the 90s, when we met Swedish game developers, they were laughing at us and telling that you are never going to get anywhere with those mobile games. And well, it didn't quite went like that. The first Finnish hit game, if we think about games, was Supreme Snowboarding by Housemarque, and it was shortly followed by Max Payne by Remedy, and also one of the early online game companies, Finland, Sulake, launched its Happy Hotel in 2000. It was first named Hotel Kultakala, but then they decided to change the name to Happy Hotel. But something went terribly wrong. Usually things go terribly wrong in the games industry. And this time it was that the web hype, which was created, and even more the .com hype, which was created in the end of 90s, crashed down. And it basically meant that the mobile game developers didn't have a platform to develop games anymore. And it created kind of chaos to the Finnish games industry. It created chaos to the whole ICT industry in global scale. But in Finland, in the games industry, it meant that all those high hopes we had about the mobile games and mobile gaming, they went down to the drain because the WAP wasn't a good protocol to develop games or create games or play games. And there was this kind of period, a couple of years period, which was basically pretty hard for the Finnish games industry. Companies went bankruptcy. Some of the companies barely survived by doing subcontracting projects to the advertising agencies or doing stuff like that. And it was kind of very difficult time for us. And if we think about the year 2004, when we actually started our operations in NeoGames, the Finnish games industry was consisting of like 40 companies, biggest one being Sulake with the Habbo Hotel. By far, Sulake was the biggest one. And we had around 600 people working in the games industry. So we had an industry, but it wasn't, to be honest, doing too well in 2004. Well, slowly the Finnish games industry recovered, and there was many reasons of that. One of them that although the WAP went down and the mobile game development in that form didn't take off, but we still had Java games. We had Java games played with those clumsy phones of that era, and we also had the first big studios making those Java games. Some of you might remember studios like Mr. Good Living, Digital Chocolate. Here in Tampere, Universum was the first one, the first kind of studio which was really taking off in the mobile side. Well, we were going forward with the games industry, but the growth back in those days it was very modest. So It was growth of some 10% per year. And considering that the value where we started was very low, so it didn't mean a lot of things from money point of view or from employees point of view. But everything changed actually again, and this time to good direction. And the change was App Store. App Store by Apple was the first time in the history of the games industry, or mobile games industry at least, when the developer was actually able to get some decent money from the games they developed. Before that, the developer share from a game sales was around 15-20% at its best. But with App Store, the developer share was suddenly 70% of the revenue of the game. And it was a very good news for Finnish games industry. Because as I mentioned, we had a long pedigree of making mobile games. And this was a perfect storm for us. It was a perfect storm for us because first time our companies were able to get decent money from the games they made. And we had some early success stories. For instance, Genbound by Secret Exit was one of those already in 2009. But the actual big success story, first one was, of course, and now we are almost in the modern times, only 10 years ago. So it was the Angry Birds by Rovio. And it created a lot of things. Angry Birds was for years, like 2 or 3 years, I think that it was one of the biggest topics in Finnish press. Angry Birds did this and Angry Birds did that and this kind of stuff. It was a commercial success, many new kind of development or many new kind of businesses were created based on the Angry Birds license business like we had never seen before. There was even bras, which were basically based on Angry Birds license. I haven't never seen those bras, but I guess that they were kind of beautiful. And it also created this kind of interest towards the Finnish games industry. Because, well, investors started to pay interest to the Finnish game studios. Investors are usually like a little bit like lemmings. When one investor goes to one direction, all the others follow the successful investor. And since there was this kind of company called Rovio here in Finland, all the investors kind of figured out that there must be something in this country and something in this Finnish game development industry that creates this kind of studios and success stories. It was a good thing for us. It was extremely good thing for us because in the game development or in the games industry, what you need is money. You need the money to pay the salaries for the people who are developing games. You need the money for marketing the games. You need the money for user acquisition. You need the money to thousands of different kind of things. It's even more true today, but it was true back in 2000 already. Well, it was the first growth spurt for the Finnish games industry. But next growth spurt was created another phenomenon or another thing. And it's more disputed than the digital distribution of mobile. It's called free-to-play games. Free-to-play games, adapting the free-to-play games to the mobile games was a big thing. Because before, well, basically this is kind of easy math. If you sell 100 copies of game, $1 each, you can earn maximum amount of $100. But if you give the game away for free, and you have in the game, you have cleverly made in-app purchases where actually the users or players can buy things inside the game. There is no limit how much they can basically spend to the game. And the first company globally who was able to adapt this model to the free-to-play games was Supercell. And Supercell, well, created the next big boom of the Finnish games industry. So more investors got interested in the Finnish games industry based on the same reasoning as they had with the Rovio. And we are in that route at the moment. So we are, at the moment, one of the most interesting industries when it comes to the mobile, especially to mobile games. The Finnish games industry is seen as a global hotspot of mobile game development. And that's where we are now, and that's how we ended up where we are now. But I have only 10 minutes left. I could talk about this like 3 hours, but I have only 10 minutes left, so we have to go on with the slides. So, something about the number of companies. At the moment, in Finland, we have around 250 companies. So, those figures you can see on the bars, they are based on the number of the companies established each year and which were still active when we made this study in the beginning of 2017. And as you can see, there is significant amount of companies established between 2012 and 2015. And this is kind of one phenomenon in the games industry. The success creates success. The success creates faith, and faith creates companies. Of course, people create companies, but faith is required if the industry wants to thrive and if the industry wants to grow. And if you think about the year 2017, as you can see, already in 2016, the number of the companies established slowed down. It was only 15. It was around the same amount of companies established in 2017. So at the moment, it seems to be that it's going to stay around that level, 10 to 15 new companies per year. But the thing is that nowadays, when companies are established, quite a lot of them are so-called second-round companies. With second-round company, I mean company which is established by people who has previous experience about the games industry. And those companies have better chances to succeed in the games industry because, well, to be honest, they know what they are doing. If you are a first-round company, you usually don't have an idea what to do business-wise or how to get the investment or what kind of mistakes you shouldn't definitely make. The turnover of the Finnish games industry, as I mentioned, back when we started Neo Games in 2004, it was around 40 million. In 2016, we had a peak in the turnover around 2.5 billion euros. And in 2017, the turnover was in the same level as in 2015, around 2.4 billion euros. So it has been a significant growth for the Finnish games industry since early days, since the end of the 90s, for instance, when the turnover of the whole industry was around a couple of boxes of bananas and some bottles of whiskey. And in 2016, the Finnish mobile game developers generated around 7% of the global revenue of the mobile industry. So it's a significant amount of the revenue of the global industry. And, well, this shouldn't be a surprise for you. I have been talking a lot about the mobile games. It doesn't mean that we don't develop games to other platforms in Finland. For instance, in Tampere, one of the most successful, if not the most successful game company, Colossal Order, is actually making PC games. We have companies like Housemarque, Remedy, creating or developing console games. We still have online game companies. For instance, Habbo Hotel is still alive. And our diversity of our industry is quite good. But the biggest success stories or the most economically significant success stories are from the mobile game development side. And that's clearly seen also from the figures. So iOS, Android, I think that in 2017 the Android surpassed iOS as the most popular platform, maybe because of the opening of the China market or the Asian market, where the Android seems to be more popular than iOS. A lot of PC online companies and PlayStation, Xbox. And one of the phenomena, we have had a lot of discussion about the VR and AR games, but it seems that at least when it comes to VR, the technology is still not there. So people don't have devices, and making VR games is, to be honest, seems to be pretty bad business at this moment. And if you think about the studios, one of the misconceptions, not for Finns so much, but for foreigners, is that Finland is basically the capital area. Well, it's not. If you think about where the companies are, so around 42% of the companies in Finland are in capital area, and all the big ones, in Helsinki, Espoo, in that area. But there is some very good hubs in other parts of Finland also. So if you think about, for instance, this, how could I say, middle part of Finland, there is hubs, and Tampere is definitely one of them. Actually, Tampere is the second largest development hub in Finland. There is Jyväskylä, there is some development there. In the west coast, there is Turku, and in the eastern part of Finland, there is Kotka, Lappeenranta, Joensuu, and even if we go to the northern part of Finland, so there is cities like Oulu and Kajaani, who have very kind of lively game developer community and some successful companies. So basically, although most of the companies are concentrated to the capital area, there is still life outside capital area in Finland. And when we talk about the number of the employees, if you think about the turnover figure, around 2.5 billion, we only have less than 3,000 people working in the games industry, in game development. So it's not a big industry when we think about the number of the employees, but it's growing industry. And at the moment when you discuss with any of the big game companies and you ask what is the biggest obstacle for the growth at the moment, they all say that it's the lack of skilled people. And that's something we have been trying to tackle with the education, and also by finding talented people from abroad. And that's basically one of the big challenges for the Finnish games industry. It's a big challenge globally also, but especially in Finnish games industry, to find talented people. And if you think about some of the demographics of the Finnish games industry at the moment, if we take all the professions, all the companies in the Finnish games industry, not only the development but also the marketing, HR, management side, around 80% of the employees are female, and around same number, 18% of the employees are non-Finnish, so they are basically, they have come from abroad, Finland, to work in the Finnish game company. And around 5% of all the employees are outside EU, ETA area. The significance with this is that it's very hard to get a working permit if you are outside the EU, ETA area. It's very easy when you are from inside EU. But still we have around that number of people coming from outside. So I have spent my time for this, and if you want to know more something more about the Finnish games industry, there is a couple of resources you could use about the let's see. Our website, so neogames.fi, so it looks like this, and here you can find different kind of, for instance, studies about the Finnish games industry. Also, if you are looking for game education, there is a list of Finnish game education somewhere. I guess it's here. So basically there is a list of all the schools providing game education. And if you are interested in this is very difficult to. If you are interested in finding a working place or finding a job from the Finnish games industry, this is maybe the best resource you can find from the internet. Games Jobs Finland, its site, there is around usually something like 100 open positions listed to this site, and you can take a look at it and find a way or find a job from the Finnish games industry. Yeah, but this was my story. Mr. Professor, nice to see you. Only just actually, when did you become a professor? Like 2 days, 3 days ago? A few days, yeah. So, congratulations. Yeah, but this was my presentation this time. So I guess that it's Joni's turn next.